All right. I think we're live now. Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Francesca Dubrack, and I'm the Chief Curator at the Anchorage Museum. And really excited to have Las Hermanas Iglesias with us this afternoon. The Anchorage Museum is situated on Dena'ina homeland, and we'd just like to start off by offering gratitude for centuries of Dena'ina care and for ongoing Dena'ina leadership and stewardship of our beautiful lands and waters. Last October, we opened How to Survive, which is an exhibition that considers the idea of survival through hope and care and asks how gestures and practices of love, protection, nurturing, and sharing can help us face the climate crisis. We are lucky to be joined by two extraordinary artists in the show, Lisa and Janelle Iglesias, also known in their collaborative work as Las Hermanas Iglesias. Both artists consider care for the planet and communities as foundational aspects of their artistic practices. So they're going to share about their work for about 30 to 40 minutes. And then in the end, we'll have time for dialogue. And we really hope that these sessions are informal and approachable so that folks feel comfortable asking questions in the chat. So if you have any questions for Janelle and Lisa, please type them in the chat and we'll make sure to get to them in the Q&A portion. And now I'll just do a little formal introduction of our artists and then pass the mic over to them. So currently teaching, parenting, and creating on opposite coasts, sisters Lisa and Janelle Iglesias produce playful work in a variety of mediums, engaging with issues such as community, feminism, and cultural hybridity. Las Hermanas Iglesias' artworks draw on their identities as children of Dominican and Norwegian immigrants and highlight relationships between family members as well as individuals in society, tying their personal to larger cultural systems and promoting cooperation and collectivity. Over the past 20 years, their practice has evolved to include a number of team efforts and variations, such as their frequent collaboration with their mother, Bodil. Did I say that properly? Okay. Lisa Iglesias is an associate professor of the Department of Studio Art at Mount Holyoke College, and Janelle Iglesias is an assistant professor at the University of California, San Diego. And you can learn more at their website, and we will be dropping relevant links in the chat to their website and other links as their talk progresses. So with that, I'll turn it over to Janelle.
Thanks so much, Fran. Share my screen. Can everybody see that? Working okay. Great. We also wanted to take this moment to share our gratitude with all of the artists and family members that have supported us in making teaching and caregiving. And so many special thanks to the incredible team at the Anchorage Museum, including Francesca and Rachel and Ryan and Ted and Kaylee, who were instrumental in making the installation happen. And so many thanks to our mom, Bo, who helped install Plum and Fathom. I was there for the week with me at the Anchorage Museum. And we also wanted to share thanks to Claire Howard and the entire staff at the Blanton Museum, where Plum and Fathom was first exhibited and traveled. So Allie Heath, the entire preparatory and fabrication team there, Matt, Andrew, James, Miguel, Michael, Eric, and Clark. And we also wanted to extend that gratitude as well to Brandon Somm and Paul Gerlitz, our partners in life and love and crime, who collaborate with us in mothering alongside our biological and chosen families. So I think we also wanted to acknowledge that we're virtually Zooming in. I'm here in San Diego, California, which is the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation.
And I'm joining you from South Hadley, Massachusetts, located in Western Massachusetts on the ancestral land of the Nonotuck people. And it's also important to acknowledge the neighboring Indigenous nations who continue to be connected to the land, including the Nipmuc and the Wampanoag to the east, the Mohegan and Pequot to the south, the Mohican to the west, and the Abenaki to the north.
And we wanted to start with just a few images of the work that's in How to Survive, which is an installation called Plum and Fathom. This installation combines almost combines two different works that kind of essentially become one. One being this kind of system of piping and hands along, kind of interwoven into this kind of bead maze like formation, and the other being this large textile that has extra warpage that's been naturally dyed coming off of it, in which the hands are kind of reweaving and unweaving different parts of it.
Here you can see some details, including the fact that intermingled within the objects are found objects that Janelle and I have collected for many years, including shells, reliquaries, like small objects such as the moon, including all of the cast hands of ourselves and our family members.
So each time this piece has been installed, it looks a little different based on the kind of orientations of the strings and all the threads that are coming off of this textile. The textile is also a living textile, and that because it's a natural dye, all of the color is constantly changing. And we're kind of excited about that idea of the textile returning to the studio and being re-dyed and over-dyed at different times as well.
We wanted to really ground our talk today with this installation, Plum and Fathom, which is included in How to Survive. And also the kind of key tenets of our talk are going to be sisterhood, collectivity, and care. And we came across this quote by Helen Molesworth that we thought really spoke to this idea of sisterhood as a non-gendered kind of idea, but one that's much more about conversation and about a resilient form of making meaning. So in this case, what if a sisterhood offered a model for forming alliances structured by a loving but skeptical engagement with the new? One that saw the new as part of a larger pattern of seriality and repetition, sameness and difference, annihilation and birth that defied the logic of chronological or teleological history. Such a model of interpretation, sisterhood, or genealogy would demonstrate that the new does not cancel the old. It would show us that the new is not a form of triumph, but a recalibration of alliances.
Another foundational text for this body of work, and that we've been thinking about a lot in the past few years, is this book by edited by Dr. Alexis Pauline Gumbs, with many different writings by many different authors, called Revolutionary Mothering. And she describes mothering as the practice of creating, nurturing, affirming, and supporting life. And in an effort to separate notions of mothering from traditional ideas about who does it, Gumbs writes, the practice of mothering that inspired us to create this book is older than feminism. It's older than and more futuristic than the category woman. We are investigating and amplifying the nuances of practices that have existed as long as there have been people of different ages with different superpowers invested in each other's existence. Another book that we wanted to mention quickly is Reassembling Motherhoods on Radical Care and Collective Artist Feminist Practices by the feminist collaboration Maternal Fantasies. They're based in Brooklyn, and one of the questions that they raise in their work is, how can art exist as a site for thinking of the maternal as a participatory practice, an effective enmeshment, and a situated political prompt in order to promote new ways of thinking, which they credit to kind of a further extrapolation from Donna Haraway. Another question is, who cares for whom, and what are the consequences? How can we rethink time, care, and reproduction through the maternal, the inescapable trouble of interdependent existences?
That sort of interdependency and entanglements are very much steeped in the ideas of care, how to care for each other, how to include those wide variety of cares into our practices, and think of really a rhizomatic way of thinking about supporting each other. And Adrienne Maree Brown, another thinker, writer, scholar, creative that we often turn to, says we need to learn how to practice love such that care for ourselves and others is understood as political resistance and cultivating resilience. That same kind of idea of thinking about love and care as political is echoed by one of our other North Stars, Bell Hooks. When we understand love as the will to nurture our own and another's spiritual growth, it becomes clear that we cannot claim to love if we are hurtful and abusive. Love and abuse cannot coexist. Abuse and neglect are, by definition, the opposites of nurturance and care. So these are really some of the ideas that we try to further in our work and are kind of grounding the talk.
And I think this idea of mothering as a verb, which is very much attributed to Alexis Pauline's Gums, as well as Angela Garb's most recently in this recent book, Essential Labor: Mothering as Social Change, really thinks about mothering this kind of as a kind of technology, as a kind of vehicle for rebellion. And so we're thinking about motherhood and sisterhood in this kind of expansive way in the work. And I think that that's developed over quite some time for us in different ways. And so we just wanted to lay that down as a sort of grounding before we kind of start sharing a little bit more about where we're coming from specifically in the work.
As Fran mentioned, we've been working together since about 2005, and we formally called ourselves at that point Las Hermanas Iglesias to really steep our work and ground our work in ideas of multiplicity and relationality, like our relationship to each other. Janelle and I were born in Queens, New York, or born and raised in Queens, New York, and our mother was from Norway, and our father is from the Dominican Republic, and we're the two youngest daughters of four. And so our close-knit family really does influence a lot of the work and ideas that we engage with, whether we are being dressed the same and being treated as twins, or whether we're each other's constant collaborative companions. Janelle and I have been collaborating, like you can see in this drawing from 1982. That was my first drawing, and then Janelle adding to it, which, that's static and that kind of fissure, as you can see, I wrote like the pen marks I really wanted to make clear that that was not the original. But that kind of collaboration, whether it's one with ease and familiarity or one with static and one with conflict, has always been really generative and has brought up questions. And so that's really has always been pushing us to work together.
So again, our mom was born in this really small mountain village in Norway, and our father was born in the very busy capital city of Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. And this is the house that our mom grew up on. It had grass growing on the roof. She skied to school. She grew up with so many different kind of heritage craft practices in her family. And so these kind of heritage craft practices in terms of like mending and darning and knitting and weaving were essential ways of being in the world, ways of sharing. This rag rug on the left is made out of scraps from the community. And so both having clothes from the immediate family, but also from the whole neighborhood. And this kind of practice of sharing scrap clothing when it could no longer be repaired or could not be handed down to somebody else who could fit it ended up in these rugs. And so we think of these rugs as a sort of inheritance. They're one of the only objects that we have that our mother's mother made. Each one of our sisters has one. And when reflecting about, our process and our kind of lineage as artists, we often return to these rugs. Another thing we return to is this practice of what's often called resquache or resquachismo, especially within a kind of mostly Chicano context, but I think largely within a Latinx context. And that is kind of making the most from the least. And, this has been described in so many different ways. There's actually another Smithsonian link in the chat. We're kind of providing a little bit of a bibliography along with this talk. You can tell we're also educators and love to share textual references. And this quote comes from the Smithsonian article from 2017, where artist, curator, and scholar Amelia Mesa Baines describes resquachismo as the view of the underdog, which combines inventiveness with a survivalist attitude. So not only is it about sort of like using like recycled materials and a sort of aesthetic that's born of necessity, it's also done with a kind of inventiveness that is also about a kind of attitude and a kind of way of being in the world that's defiant and that is proud as well. So Lisa and I both have individual practices. My practice is rooted in sculpture and installation, and we maintain studio practices alongside our collaboration, which has been going on for about 20 years. In my practice, I'm really interested in working through objects and materials. I often consider myself a kind of object poet, who really thinks about site specificity and site sensitivity in terms of creating these new choreographies of materials and space and kind of eliciting new dialogues from familiar and unfamiliar materials.
And Janelle's going to be showing us some of my older work from 2013 and then one from today, in which you can see that my work is very much grounded in drawing and painting and thinking about materials as metaphor, thinking about patterns and gestures and processes across materials. We're going to segue a little bit into our collaborative work now, as we continue to think about what are the sorts of overarching themes and threads that weave throughout our work. This is an example of the kind of playfulness or kind of this focus on relationship that Janelle and I often return to. Also, this thinking about ways that an object can change form or change its identity over time. And so we made self-portraits of ourselves as in the form of a piñata, and then sort of tongue-in-cheek reference to sibling rivalry. We then went at these piñatas, and then the piñatas were left on the floor with the candy spillage for gallery visitors to come and take, what they wanted, and those sorts of candies and that candy spillage is a direct reference to Felix Gonzalez Torres. And you can see his work here. This is an artist that Janelle and I often return to in terms of, in many terms, but in one in which we think about how the political can be poetic and how relationships and care and the personal and the politics and the political can all live in one space together.
So we're often kind of drawing from our autobiography in our work and also really thinking about kind of the social life of sculpture in many different ways. This is an early work that has had many different iterations. It's called Everybody Likes to Dance. And in this project, we asked our mother to choose a song that she grew up dancing with, and our father to choose a song that he grew up dancing to. So a pulse, which is sort of like a polka, and a merengue. And we further collaborated with about 5 different musicians to create mashups from those songs. So this project actually has a kind of soundtrack that has these different mashups that you can listen to that's played in the space, as well as this hand-drawn dance diagram. And again, sort of referencing these works in art history. This is a dance diagram project by Andy Warhol on the right. On the left is a kind of takeaway poster of our choreography. And in the installation, one thing that was really interesting to us is that we weren't necessarily performing the choreography as a sort of right or wrong way to do this particular kind of mashup or dance, similar to the kind of remixes, which ranged from kind of sonic experiences that were more like sound art to really danceable tracks. You could encounter these instructions of left, right, and turn in a myriad of different ways. And then we had these customized disco balls that were hanging above the ceiling that mashed up the colors of the Norwegian, Dominican, and US flags, which all have red, white, and blue. And this piece was originally made for the Queens Museum. So there's also kind of these I Love New York, thinking about our family as a kind of microcosm of many, many different families in New York that were immigrant families as well.
And for each of our projects, we try to produce takeaway posters that, again, are a nod to Felix Gonzalez Torres and this idea that this sculpture changes form whenever the audience takes, something from the stack. And of course, the idea of sharing a gift with the viewer is also really paramount to us. Sometimes these takeaway posters have palindromes, which, because we're very interested in wordplay and the idea that a statement could be read forward and backwards. And sometimes these takeaway posters have different lives and they get turned into flags that you can see in the images here that sometimes blur the inside of a space with the outside, or can play with a sort of like nationalism or expectation of what a flag can do or communicate. And with those posters, we often use those as strategies for collaborating with our family members. Here you can see my kid Bowie, who is participating in one of the poster productions, drawing some of the language that gets then turned into a poster that viewers are able to take and turn into a one-sheet zine. So by inviting the viewer to inject their own color into it. They're sort of helping us produce a catalog of a project.
Since, I think when we first started collaborating, Las Hermanas was very much this kind of third entity beyond what we were doing in our own individual studios. And one of the things that's been really important to us since we started collaborating was that there's no one way of collaborating for us. That collaboration is this very plastic, flexible, expansive, and full of possibility, amorphous verb. And so at one point, we also decided that we were going to let our individual practices really collapse on top of each other in terms of some of the forms and things we were interested in. And that also collaboration could mean somebody starting something and somebody finishing it, or somebody taking apart somebody else's work and reorganizing it. And so we're constantly kind of thinking about what possible rules we've put in place, and if we want to keep those rules or we want to disrupt them or try something new or flip it on its head and see what happens. So this is a show from 2017, Every Force Evolves a Form, that was born out of really going through our familial home in Queens after the death of our father. And we had a house in which so many objects and memories and things would accumulate. And, I think that has always been a part of both Lisa and my practice in terms of thinking about the material and emotional history of objects. So this was sort of a way to process that and kind of reinvent how some of these, like furniture parts and medical equipment and plastic fruit and all kinds of things, could become new gestures and could kind of move forward in new and different ways. This is one of the first times that we also started thinking, I think, really like realizing that for us, a lot of our collaboration was about collapsing the space between any kind of categorization. So, in terms of the piñatas, are they like a figurative sculpture? Are they a participatory artwork? Are they, is it a video? Is it a performance? A lot of times our sculptures behave more like drawings in space, and our paintings behave more like sculptures in space. And so this was a kind of linear tubular sculpture that was a recombinatory process from all these different materials. And collage has been another thread that has been kind of essential to us for quite a long time in our practice. And one of the things about that idea of collage is that we don't really think of that as a very with any kind of purity in terms of materials all have a kind of value and their own kind of interesting weights and histories and effects that they bring to a piece. So oftentimes our work combines both handmade and found and altered objects all at the same time. This is one of the projects where we also first used casts of our hands in terms of thinking about the specificity of the maker and the hand being part of the sculpture, and also really liking this kind of continuity through time about kind of classical sculpture to contemporary sculpture as well.
This is a project that we worked on together at the ASU Art Museum, Resistors. And in this project, we were going to see that there was an exhibition within a gallery space. And we also incorporated a workshop with families who visited where there was a hallway leading to the exhibition. And in that hallway was a set of niches, as you can see on the left, with light emanating through. And so we invited people to create sculptures that then would get placed into the niche that were on view, and the visitors could place them and then come pick them up throughout the duration of the show to have them be part of the exhibition, but also that these niches would also change their identities as time passed as well. This space led into the gallery, where in this sculpture, Know Its Opposition, we inherited walls that were being let go from the museum holdings, and by creating windows and sort of these tunnels, we really wanted to create this sort of faux wall within the gallery space and then create portals and disrupt that sort of attempt to wall off or create a barrier within the space. In this work, we are really very much centering this idea of mothering and matrescence. This project also has become a really good example of how our projects shift and are totally in flux throughout the duration of their existence. In this project, it started with my pregnancy in 2012 with my first kid. And here you can see Janelle and I talking about commiserating, approximating one's relationship, ideas about empathy. And so we started this tradition of really lo-fi photography where we would set up an iPhone moment in whatever space that we were at at the time. So for that, the former example is where we were subletting in Brooklyn. The next shot is an Airbnb in Florida where I had been living. And in this shot, it's in 2019, where that pregnancy resulted in a stillbirth with my daughter, Luna. And so rather than stop the project, we decided that the project would take on all of its life and experiences and Luna's passing. And so incorporating that event into the series of photographs, you can see the cabbage and hospital provided underwear, and how this project then grew to expand and include a spreadsheet about restorative practices, restorative justice, and restorative reproductive justice information that Janelle and I wanted to share while we were going through the experience of stillbirth. We found that there was quite a dearth or lack of inclusive information and experiences about miscarriage, stillbirth, abortion, and other reproductive justice topics. And so I'm looking for the, I'm going to put it into the chat. We created a listserv, or rather a spreadsheet that's open source that you can contribute to. That's very much focused, as I said, on reproductive justice and wanting to cite reproductive justice as a term that was coined in the 90s by the women whose names are on this slide. And you can find out a lot of really strong information about reproductive justice on Sister Song's website. This project expanded during COVID. Both Janelle and myself found ourselves pregnant. Janelle?
So I think this is a slide from 2019 or 2020. And it continues to happen. This project continues on. I'm just going to show a couple more pictures from 2021 as well. And I love this quote by Catherine Ricketts from The Mother Artist. When we spend hours tending to vulnerable bodies, how does it change the art that we make? And how might that art change a society so often characterized by brutality? And instead of trying to reject the idea that our families expanding and changing was not going to affect our work, I think this idea of matrescence and this idea of caregiving, which really came to the foray during COVID, was something that we really wanted to embrace in our projects moving forward. This project is usually shown as a series of pretty casual photographs that are almost hung as if they're kind of family photos along the wall. And we're excited to see and where this project goes and how it's going to shift and continue.
This project shown at Brick, Chasing Their Ponytails Too, is another example of a drawing in space that Janelle and I incorporate found objects and objects that are made by hand, including the woven sampler that we created at the Textile Art Center. A really important residency for us in Brooklyn, New York, that we did with our mother. So incorporating all these various objects and tactilities and that they hold space and can be collaged together to create new associations, whether it's faux hair or a part of a cane or part of a weaving that our parents found on the side of the road and then shown hung up in our Queens home, or the sampler that we each added to by hand. So this, like Janelle, you talked about these object poems. I think really creating new sentence structures and ways of meaning when all of these objects can hold space together.
We started, we worked with our mom on and off in different forms of collaboration, maybe as early as 2006, Lisa. I think our mom knit a a kind of conjoined twin dress for us at some point early on, and a nude suit that we continue to photograph and have in photographic and make these digital photographs with. But we began working on a series of textiles with her circa 2014. And in 2021, we had an exhibition at the National Nordic Museum of a culmination of about 6 years of these textile projects that are very different. Like in each piece, there are all these different kinds of approaches and ways in terms of collaboration. So this piece, Mother Love, and that's featured in this slide, is built on this kind of architectural frame, and it's made so that you can see both the kind of front, or what might be considered the back, of each piece, and that some of these works also have different holes and negative areas where you can see them kind of in concert with each other. And also on one of the architectural rungs is one of the rag rugs that's made by our mother's mother. There's also a kind of knit version of that kind of motif and patterning in the rag rugs. There's also pieces that are homages to Annie Albers, who's often considered sort of the mother of kind of modern textiles, and in terms of somebody who really was influential in kind of collapsing some of the space between fine art and craft. And this space of, you go ahead.
Janelle and I often will finish each other's sentences or often interrupt each other, so that our talking is also this collage and back and forth and call and response, much like the work, to bring it back. Our knit paintings with our mom have been done in a variety of structures, as Janelle mentioned. Sometimes they're hanging from armatures, sometimes they're stretched over stretcher bars, and sometimes they're slumped from the wall, to really think about what can a painting or a textile do and how to disrupt those sorts of assumptions or categorical traditions. And we're increasingly starting to include line drawings, whether the line drawings are taking place with embroidery or felting, that allude to anatomical parts or of human bodies, or certain gestures that might allude to reproductive justice or family planning measures. La Nueva Fabrica was another really influential and important residency for us in terms of care, in terms of textile traditions, and in terms of collectivity, where we spent time with each other, and re-engaged our matrilineal connection to weaving and to crochet and knitting and other kind of textile processes. While we were there, we shared a lot of information and skills with each other, and we also went to workshops with a local dyer, which we're going to put her name in the chat. And so natural dyeing really became increasingly important to us, starting a little bit before this time, but definitely at this residency, we received a lot of information.
At Nueva Fabrica, which is, again, a really amazing organization based in Guatemala, there was a weaving factory that hosted the studio for artists in residence there. And we commissioned this large textile that had about 12 feet of extra warpage on it, and then brought that back to the studio. And this is an image in my studio of working on some of the natural dye with a local dyer here, Rachel Island Smith, who's amazing. And Lisa and I had both been doing a bunch of research regarding natural dyes and ethnobotany, and thinking about kind of color and both like what natural dyes would produce certain colors, but also what natural plants and herbs were used in family planning. And so this is right after Roe was overturned, and we're really thinking about reproductive justice and reproductive rights, and thinking about the kinds of knowledge sharing that were really important, both in how to access reproductive care, and also thinking back to reviving kind of different ways that people were reviving and sharing knowledge around about family planning, around natural abortifacients, around fertility management, around kind of how to heal post-pregnancy, like all different kinds of of ways of natural healing. And so the dyes in that piece are all plants and herbs that are used in family planning. Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, Sam Gilliam's work has been really influential to us, both in terms of how one might conceive or think about a painting, or how to install a painting, or how to think about how a painting might be constructed, but also to think about how the poetic and the political can hold space together. He's quoted to say, "The expressive act of making a mark and hanging it in space is always political. My work is as political as it is formal." As you can see in this work, the title refers to historical events. And here it marks the date that Gilliam completed this painting against the backdrop of mass demonstrations protesting the Vietnam War.
And so the way that the image on this textile was made was through dripping the dyes sort of upside down and letting them kind of wash over the textile. And we were really thinking about trying to make a gesture that captured this idea of the green wave, which is this movement that's started in Latin America and has been moving through the United States as well in terms of reproductive justice. So both having a textile that kind of evoked a sense of a wave moving through space, and also had this kind of color reference, and then also brought up these ideas around like water and how things flow and other kinds of systems as well. And so having all of these, these references together for us is both like a kind of an abstract textile and a kind of formal piece, but also has like all of this, these layers of information within it.
Here's a photograph from a residency that we did at Stoneleaf Retreat. Big shout out to Helen Toomer. We're putting into the chat links that will help give some background to that experience as well. And here you can see how our lives are constantly mingling, whether it's with canine friends or with studio helpers that are, infants. And we try to really incorporate all levels of our lives together, because as a necessity, but also as a political and philosophical stance, not to issue one over the other. So at this residency, as you can see, Janelle's working on casting. We worked on collective casting with our hands and other objects that we put into Plum and Fathom. So sorry, you go.
That's okay. No, alongside Plum and Fathom, we also produced a series of collages. And so I think what's interesting about the collages is that they're really kind of employing similar strategies to things that are happening in the work, but in other material ways. But they're utilizing photographs of different objects and using those as this kind of new kind of constellations and displays of those objects on top of these kind of multicolored, like high chroma woven patterns. And so within the series, there are the series that kind of focus on shells, a series that are photographs of some of the hands that are in the sculptural installation, and also deities that are kind of thought to be like fertility fetishes and kind of like matriarchal kind of different deities as well from our familial cultures mostly. And here's a picture of those installed.
In this project, these collages were hung kind of catty corner to another artwork that we're going to click to that included a wool blanket that was passed back and forth between Janelle and I, and painted onto and embroidered onto. And we really wanted to use that was held in space by a cast of our mother's hand. The act of embroidering was important to us because historically devalued as women's work, we really wanted to incorporate that sort of repetition and textile associated process, but also think about how, like, join in that, like, we're part of this conversation in terms of how textiles might be subversive or might be a sort of tongue-in-cheek way to question power.
So back to Plum and Fathom, you can see here the textile kind of hung on the far side of the installation as it kind of unravels throughout the rest of these networks of tubes. And so we're really thinking about tubing as kind of a way of kind of how do you kind of visualize networks and systems. And so both kind of internal systems in terms of like internal plumbing, literally, and also kind of domestic plumbing systems. But then, none of these systems are really, all of them kind of move through the space in indirect ways. So thinking about all the kind of workarounds that are necessary for chosen and biological families to survive, to do the things that we need to do to help each other in life. And so we're really thinking about both kind of personal networks and events that have happened in our lives, but also kind of these different historical networks of largely women that have been really inspiring in terms of helping each other and helping each other's families.
And how mutual aid networks, how working together, collectivity in the face of climate justice, in the face of reproductive justice limitations, that collectivity and working together, how those ideas can be seen through the metaphor of weaving and the metaphor of textiles in terms of how weft and warp are determinant or reliant upon each other. We're really interested in weaving as metaphor and also as a historical marker. And as Janelle mentioned, Annie Albers has been a huge influence upon our work. About Annie Albers, Ty Smith wrote, "Weaving is a particular method like writing that binds or connects historical movement." Smith went on to say, Albers notes that along with cave paintings, threads were among the first transmitters of meaning. Threads and fabrics communicate through stitched connections and tactile experience. Reading a textile entails an entanglement of different sensory modes. And so Janelle and I often incorporate textiles for a variety of purposes, whether it's to connect with a matrilineal ancestry or whether it's a continuum of care or a way to connect a line or a constellation between various markers for what needs help or what needs attention, or how to cast a relationship between an earthly body or a human body.
Yeah, I think that there's something specific about the way that literal threads can entangle and enmesh and weave together all those entanglements of different issues and how all of the struggles are totally interrelated. In the first installation of Plumb and Fathom, there was a neon piece that kind of hung above it and also created this kind of green glow over it. And it's another palindrome. You want to continue, Lisa?
Yeah, I think Janelle and I tried to be generative with playfulness and humor as a sort of marker for resistance, and also tapping into anger and rage. In this next slide, we think that the quote by Maisha Cherry is really beautiful as she talks about Lordian, referring to like this Lordian rage, like Audre Lorde's ideas about how rage can be productive and generative, and how anger can actually be a form of resistance and solidarity in a really creative and a really sort of unifying or a collective sense. And so that idea of rage and anger brought us to that palindrome. Often we're asked if we invent the palindromes. We don't. So we're more palindrome gleaners. When we find a palindrome, we put it in our pocket. And this palindrome really speaks to us when thinking about issues of climate justice and reproductive justice and resistance.
So it's a kind of hand traced neon of our handwriting, writing, "Damn it, I'm mad." And it kind of, again, creates this kind of overglow into the space.
Often multiple sensory qualities are enacted, whether it's through the multiple sensory of textiles, which carry tactile and visual properties, or whether or not we include sound, whereby we often invite someone in our family to act as docent. And recently, a lot of that has gone to Bowie Girlitz Iglesias. We're going to include this as one of our last slides, where Bowie provided an audio score to kind of navigate one's way through our textiles.
Oh, let me see if I can get that back. So.
Close your eyes for 10 minutes. What does it smell like? What does it look like? I love your imagination. It's so good. Take a friend if you want to. Okay, now it's time to go, lovers. We're time to go.
Thank you guys, everyone, so much.
Thanks for joining us.
It was so wonderful. Your links were amazing.
Oh, one
Alex
more.
was copy pasting. Thank you so much.
We recently went to a show at Mass Mocha, and I had my kiddo with me, who's 3.5, who didn't like that one of the galleries was very darkened of the show that I most wanted to see. And they had a QR code for a bibliography of the
Ooh.
show, and it felt like hot gold. It was this to experience the show and all of the conceptual underpinnings and all of the nodes that were coming out of it, in addition to, the brochure and things online and what I was able to glean kind of running through the space quickly. And so we're always trying to share as many juicy bits of things that we can that have inspired us.
That's awesome. Well, that kind of leads directly into one of the questions I had prepared for you all. And this could be like a very personal or a response to sort of like how you began learning or figuring out the world. But one thing I love about your work, in addition to your presentation style, is how you make a lot of space for different ways of understanding, perpetuating, and disseminating knowledge and experience. And I'd love for you each to share just a little bit about any relevant experience you've had as artists, educators, parents, or even your experiences as early learners that informed your approach to this. And if you have ideas of how you're, expanding upon that maybe in future projects too.
Lisa,
Yeah,
think a little bit about ping pong.
We can totally start this question with ping pong. Go for it, Janelle.
Well, I was thinking of the first residency that Lisa and I did was through the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. Had this amazing parents residency program where we were able to go to Paris for 6 months and work together. And we had just sort of finished grad school and moved back to New York, where we were both from and where our kind of friend community was, and then had this opportunity to go and completely just focus, not have jobs, not have anything else going on, but focus on the collaboration. And it was as much like romantically fantastic and amazing and a dream as it was so challenging, because we realized we hadn't gone to high school together, we hadn't gone to grad school together, and we hadn't lived together, since we, were 16 or so. And so it was all of a sudden being in a country where neither of us spoke the language fluently and sharing a kind of one room with 2 cots and 2 burners in the middle of a very new situation and trying to make work together. We were encountering like how much we as specifically as family members too can get on each other's nerves and rub each other the wrong way and question each other and criticize each other in a way that other collaborators might have different lines that they draw. So it's both, I feel like collaborating with family is amazing in terms of like how vulnerable and how honest and just like how juicy it can be, but it can also, you're never quite as mean as you are to like somebody who has to love you anyway. And one of the things that we realized during that residency was that there was a ping pong table outside of the residency in a park, a concrete steel table. And that when we were kind of at wit's end with each other, we would go, and also sometimes when we were having a big disagreement about something in a creative process, we would go play ping pong. And the ping pong would sort of be a way of like, sometimes it was whoever wins gets to make the decision and we get to go try their way first. And if that doesn't work, we get to try the other person's way. Sometimes it was just a way that we had something else going on that we could talk and be mean to each other in a different way that was about a kind of competitiveness. Sometimes it was just seeing how many times we could hit the ball back and forth. But I think of ping pong also because we had a ping pong table, we had access to a ping pong table growing up, and we never competed with each other on a ping pong table when we were little. We always tried to see how long we could keep a volley going. That was like our thing. And it was never about somebody beating the other person and coming out ahead. It was always, how can we do this together? And how can we grow and help each other get better so that as a team, we can do this longer and longer and longer uninterrupted. And so that way of being in the world, I feel like is very strangely shaped a lot of our ways of collaborating. Do you think about that sometimes too, Lisa, the ping pong?
Well, definitely, I think that this idea of that we were going for the best of what our team could do is really relevant, and also rule breaking, right? That just like in Everybody Likes to Dance, we proposed a choreography, but we were really most excited when people would create their own games and deviate. And so taking a ping pong table and creating our own, whether we're using the walls or trying to volley it for as long as possible, that it's more about that than the singular competition model. And I was also thinking in terms of your question, Fran, how when we were growing up, we didn't grow up with art in our lives very much, beyond like collaging from our older sisters, like teen magazines and we weren't a family that went to museums or we didn't know artists. And so I think that our kind of association with like thinking that we might grow up to be marine biologists or loving to read or things like that. I think that the sort of non-art world or lack of an exposure to a so-called art world or much of any kind of art world or like model of an artist, I think has really led to us thinking of in terms of like a variety of strategies rather than like one way to be.
That's great. Thank you both. And I also wanted to just note, I know we don't have a ton of time, but we welcome questions from the audience. If you do have questions for Janelle and Lisa, please throw them in the chat. And we have one from Tim that I would like to share with you all. So they say, I love how the meaning of sisterhood is so active and open, a verb in motion, while it seems our sense of brotherhood is more closed or clubby and related to competition and resistance to conflict. Can you say more about this?
Yeah, I mean, I love that question. Thank you, Tim. I think, it reminds me of that expression, which I'm not remembering exactly, but it's like patriarchy is harmful to all living things. And I think that your question speaks to the power of language and how I think that's why wordplay is so interesting to Janelle and I in terms of like how to engage wordplay and punnery and palindromes and poetry and how linguistics and rhetoric and language really forms our worldview. And so I think taking on sisterhood and matriarchy and maternity and like these sorts of very female-centric words and thinking of them in transgender ways, thinking about this in terms of like as Janelle put it, these strategies or tools for collectivity in really resilient and political and activist sorts of senses is really beautiful for us. That we think about like sistering and mothering and sisterhood as these ways that can be emancipatory. And I agree. I think that there's a lot of really heavy associations with other terms.
Janelle, is there anything you wanted to add, or should I dive into
it makes me think about, I think we're all still kind of like struggling in a way to think about like kind of like almost like a multi-species way of thinking about kinship and thinking about belonging to each other, and I think there is something weird about brotherhood that sometimes has these kind of connotations of like exclusivity that I don't think Lisa and I ever attributed to sisterhood. I think that was like one of the things that drew us towards thinking about a collaborative name as Las Hermanas is like you often hear, I think even Alexis Pauline Gumbs, like one of her qualifiers is like sister doctor Alexis Pauline Gumbs, that it's also this like idiom as a kind of like a very friendly and open way of connecting to people. And I'm hopeful that we just keep coming up with more and more terminology that's more and more expansive into this sort of sense of belonging to each other and relating to each other.
That's lovely. Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to ask you both a question about optimism. I heard in a previous artist talk that you gave where you spoke a lot about your use of the color yellow as a way to just visually incorporate the idea of optimism into your work. And you've spoken about sort of like the subversive power of humor and play, and I think that has something to do with this optimism question, but I'm just curious to hear you talk a little bit more about optimism in your practice, as well as like how it physically manifests in your work. And are there activities or habits of mind that you cultivate in order to maintain an attitude of optimism during a time of such ecological and societal disruption?
We talk about optimism quite a bit, and maybe at this point, more than optimism, or have been talking about hope, and like not in the terms, not optimistic or hopeful in a sort of narcissistic or Pollyanna frame of mind, but rather like a resistant, resilient form of hope in the face of these like multiple and simultaneous dire circumstances that we find ourselves in. I think that part of it is and like for necessity, for in terms of like if we can spiral into this nihilistic defeatism, or we can be resistant and maintain a continuum of attempt and trying and resistance and solidarity, because the alternative is so dire and so depressing, and so it doesn't lead anywhere.
Yeah, and in terms of like cultivating habits, I think um I think that like the habits of gratitude, of just like I think that working together, I think we continually feel so lucky to have each other and to have each other's support and like viewpoints and tension and all different kinds of things. I think like when we are able to spend time together, whether day or something like that, I think that we're sort of grounded in a kind of gratitude for that time and space to be together and to work together and to learn from each other. And we don't, I think, especially because we live across the country from one another and we're juggling these, the craziness of contemporary life and teaching and mothering and making and all the things, yeah, I think that that we see the ability to come and like practice and try to align our philosophies and practice together as such a gift. And so like really like kind of honoring where we're at and what we need like holistically, is that like I need to take a shower before we can start talking because I'm so exhausted, is that you need to take this part over and I need to do this other, like also having like flexibility and kind of honoring like the holistic with whatever's happening in our lives during the creation of each project is important too. So like not sticking to one way things have to be, but being really open for whatever is the right kind of that whatever can fill our particular cups in that moment and help us through that moment is important. What do you think?
That is a wonderful segue to me having to go pick up my daughter from daycare. So Janelle shared with me that she is available to continue answering questions, but I have to bow out. So thank you so much to the Anchorage Museum and to Fran specifically, and to community. And Janelle, I'll text you later, and Fran, I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, Lisa. All right. I know that I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I don't want Lisa to get too much FOMO, so I'm just going to ask one more question. But I was also realizing as you were answering that question, I was like, does this come back to ping pong also? Okay, so this question is related specifically to sustainability, and I've been asking other artists participating in the show this question in every talk, and it always yields some really interesting responses. So it's perhaps meaty for another future project, but I'm curious to know what sustainability means to you in your practice, where you're at and where you'd like to be in the future. Just noting that some other artists have suggested they prefer different terms such as reciprocity or sustaining. So if there's a different term that you would use, please share that with us. And this can address tangible, practical concerns around like how your work is made or shipped or produced, but it could also be more abstract, emotional things, and also like the impulse to incorporate time with family as part of your collaborative process.
Yeah, I think, I think we're okay with the word sustainable, but sort of not, but more of like a continuum of that word that also includes things like reciprocity, that includes radical kindness, that includes equity, that includes a lot of different parts of what maybe I'm trying to do is answer what sustainability means to us is like something much more huge. That I think that, we're always trying to figure out how we can align practices and philosophies in terms of like best practices for the environment and for our communities, and to also like learn from past mistakes or learn how we could do better. And I think, it's interesting. I think one of the things in our work that we happen to do is we revisit a lot of older work, and we continue to have conversations with it. And so it might be like a kind of treated as almost like a starter culture for a new piece. Almost like you're making like kombucha or like sourdough or something, where you cut off a piece of it and it becomes this really generative force in a new work. But like rather than thinking of our works as these static objects to be collected, we really think of them as tools and like ways to learn and ways to continue. And so, I think that those things are always being revisited and reinterpreted, and sometimes given away or sometimes used in a totally different kind of sense. And so we're kind of, I think, resistant of a lot of like capitalist modes of production that prioritize this kind of static object that isn't supposed to change, and it's not supposed to degrade, it's not all those kinds of things. And we're trying to kind of resist also these expectations for perfection. And so when, even in our conversations with each other around work that's going to go into a show, sometimes we have to like check what our priorities are, and those kinds of expectations of perfection and where they're coming from, and like make new decisions based on how we want to be in the world. And that might affect how the work is going to manifest. And definitely, I think in terms of like trying to incorporate time with family and like, have modes of working that invite time with family and invite new modes of relationship, and to approach each project and every opportunity as a possibility to build new relationships, and to really like think about how we can do that each time. And yeah, I think that's how sustainability sort of plays out for us. And I
That's,
love that so much. I feel like, Fran, that was one of our first conversations, maybe.
I was going to say, I feel like that resonates so much on the museum practice side of things, just this like focused resistance or questioning of perfection in the process, and also trying to prioritize relationships over the physical things. And I think that's something that museums are sort of set up in opposition to. So you have to be really, constantly aware of it and negotiating those ideas. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's just been really wonderful to talk to both of you, and also many of the other artists in the show around this idea. I hope it helps push things forward on the museum side, and helps museums become better partners and collaborators to artists who are raising these questions as well.
Well, for us, it's been such a refreshing invitation to exhibit a project in terms of like problem solving around all of these really important questions, rather than taking for granted the like sort of best museum practices in a very particular and narrow form. And just the framing of the exhibition was really refreshing to us in terms of all of these different entanglements, and in terms of seeing the museum as like a very active player in that part of the conversation as well. So yeah, we're continuing to revisit the show and all the artists' work and all the artist talks. And yeah, it is such a pleasure to be part of it.
Well, thank you so much, Janelle. Thank you for sharing your time with us today, and to everybody who tuned in live. Tim, thank you for your wonderful question. And this will be posted on the museum Facebook page, but it will also be on the exhibition website which will remain up after the exhibition closes later on in 2025. So thank you so much, Janelle. Thank you to Lisa as well. And you have a beautiful rest of your day.
You too. Take care, friend.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.